I am Hercule Poirot. Welcome to my new mystery story.
The December fog that descended upon Blackmore Hall that evening was of the sort that transforms the familiar world into something altogether more sinister. It rolled across the Yorkshire moors like a living thing, thick and yellow-grey, swallowing landmarks and muffling sounds until one might fancy that civilization itself had been erased. By 7:30, the fog pressed against the tall windows of the manor house with such persistence that even the warmth of the drawing-room fires seemed insufficient to dispel the chill that crept through the very stones of the ancient walls. I confess that I found the atmosphere rather oppressive as our motorcar wound its way up the long drive toward Blackmore Hall. My friend Hercule Poirot, however, seemed quite unperturbed by the weather, adjusting his muffler with characteristic precision and gazing thoughtfully through the misted window with those remarkable grey eyes that missed nothing. "You are uncomfortable, mon ami," he observed, noting my grip upon the steering wheel. "But consider, what better evening could there be for secrets? The fog, she is like a confessor's booth, no? She hides what should not be seen, she muffles what should not be heard. Tonight, if there are truths to be hidden, they will whisper themselves into the winter fog." His words proved more prophetic than either of us could have imagined. Our host, Sir Montague Blackmore, had extended the invitation with unusual urgency. A man of considerable wealth derived from railway investments, Sir Montague was known throughout Yorkshire for his hospitality and his collection of rare manuscripts. His letter to Poirot had been brief but intriguing. "A matter of family honor requires your immediate attention. Come at once and bring Captain Hastings. The fog season has brought unwelcome visitors to Blackmore Hall." The manor itself emerged from the mist like something from a Gothic romance, all towers and battlements, with ivy-covered walls that seemed to absorb what little light escaped from the mullioned windows. As we approached the great entrance, I could see that despite the weather, Sir Montague was entertaining guests. The warm glow spilling from the windows suggested a house party in full swing, though the fog lent even this cheerful scene an air of mysterious isolation. Pembroke, the butler who admitted us, was a man whose dignity remained unruffled even by the extraordinary circumstances of our late arrival. "Sir Montague is in the library with his guests, Monsieur Poirot," he informed us with a slight bow. "He asked that you join them immediately upon your arrival. The evening's entertainment is about to commence." As we followed Pembroke through corridors lined with ancestral portraits, their eyes seeming to track our movement in the flickering gaslight, I caught fragments of conversation and laughter from the library ahead. The sounds seemed oddly muffled, as if the fog had somehow penetrated even the interior of the house, wrapping everything in its secretive embrace. The library at Blackmore Hall was a magnificent chamber, its walls lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound volumes that spoke of generations of scholarly pursuit. A great fire crackled in the stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows across the assembled company. Sir Montague himself, a robust man in his 60s with silver hair and keen blue eyes, rose to greet us with evident relief. "Poirot, Hastings, thank heavens you've arrived safely. This fog is absolutely treacherous." He gestured toward his guests with a mixture of pride and barely concealed anxiety. "Allow me to present my family and friends. We are quite a cozy gathering tonight, though I fear the weather has made us rather more cozy than anticipated." The introductions that followed revealed a carefully curated collection of individuals, each with their own relationship to Sir Montague and, as I would soon discover, their own reasons for being present on this fog-shrouded evening. Lady Vivian Blackmore, Sir Montague's wife, was a woman of striking beauty despite her 50 years, with dark hair elegantly arranged and eyes that held a hint of sadness beneath their social warmth. She extended a gloved hand Poirot with gracious formality, though I noticed the slight tremor in her fingers. "Monsieur Poirot, your reputation precedes you. I do hope our little gathering won't prove too dull for a man of your particular talents." Her stepson, Mr. Roderick Blackmore provided a sharp contrast to his father's robust geniality. A pale, thin man in his 30s with nervous hands and darting eyes, he had the look of someone perpetually calculating odds. His greeting was polite but distant, and I observed that he positioned himself near the windows as if seeking escape routes, even in casual conversation. Dr. Helena Marsh, the family physician, was a woman of middle years whose professional competence was evident in every gesture. She had been treating Sir Montague for a minor heart condition, she explained, and had been invited to stay for the evening when the fog made travel inadvisable. Her sharp eyes and measured speech suggested a mind accustomed to precise observation and careful diagnosis. The final member of the party was perhaps the most intriguing. Miss Cordelia Ashford, Sir Montague's private secretary, and, according to local gossip, a young woman of exceptional intelligence who had earned her employer's complete trust in matters both professional and personal. She was quietly beautiful, with auburn hair and green eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail of the room and its occupants. "Now then," said Sir Montague, rubbing his hands together with forced joviality, "I promised you all a special treat this evening. The fog may have trapped us here together, but we shall make the best of it. Cordelia, my dear, would you be so kind as to fetch the Blackmore manuscript from the safe? It's time our guests saw the family's greatest treasure." Miss Ashford moved with quiet efficiency to a painting that concealed a wall safe. As she worked the combination, Sir Montague explained to Poirot and myself the significance of what we were about to see. The Blackmore manuscript is a 13th century illuminated text, one of only 3 known copies in existence. It's been in my family for over 2 centuries, and it's quite literally priceless. I thought tonight would be the perfect opportunity to share it with those who matter most to me. There was something in his tone, a finality, perhaps, or a note of farewell, that made Poirot's eyebrows rise slightly. Miss Ashford had opened the safe and was reaching inside when she suddenly froze. "Sir Montague," she said, her voice carefully controlled, "I'm afraid there's been some mistake. The manuscript, it's not here." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the whisper of fog against the windows and the soft hiss of the fire. Sir Montague's face went white, then flushed with anger. "Impossible! I placed it there myself just this morning. Look again." But Miss Ashford's thorough search confirmed what she had already discovered. The safe, though securely locked, was empty save for some family documents and a small jewelry box. The Blackmore manuscript, worth more than the manor house itself, had vanished. "Ladies and gentlemen," said Sir Montague, his voice shaking with emotion, "it appears we have a thief among us. No one has left this house since the fog descended. The manuscript must still be here, and by God we shall find it." It was at this moment that Poirot stepped forward, his manner calm and reassuring despite the chaos that threatened to engulf the room. "Sir Montague," he said gently, "perhaps it would be wise to ensure that all doors and windows are secured before we proceed further. In weather such as this, with visibility so poor, it would be all too easy for someone to slip away unnoticed." As if summoned by his words, the lights suddenly flickered. Once, twice, and then went out entirely, plunging the library into darkness save for the dancing flames of the fire. In the confusion that followed, I heard a woman's sharp intake of breath, the scrape of a chair being pushed back, and then, cutting through the darkness like a blade, a sound that chilled my blood. It was a whisper, soft, sibilant, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The fog keeps its secrets, and so shall I. When Pembroke arrived moments later with candles and oil lamps, we found ourselves staring at a scene of even greater horror. Sir Montague Blackmore lay slumped in his leather chair, his face peaceful, but his body utterly still. Dr. Marsh's swift examination confirmed what we all feared. Our host was dead. "His heart," she announced, her professional composure barely masking her shock. It appears to have been sudden cardiac failure, though." She paused, leaning closer to examine something. "There's a peculiar scent about him, something I can't quite identify." Poirot moved forward with that peculiar gliding step of his eyes taking in every detail of the scene. The fog pressed against the windows like curious spectators, and somewhere in the darkness beyond, I fancied I could hear that whisper again. Soft, mocking, triumphant. "Mes amis," said Poirot quietly, "we find ourselves in a situation most grave. A priceless manuscript has vanished, our host is dead under suspicious circumstances, and we are all trapped here together by this fog until morning. I suggest we make ourselves comfortable, for it appears that the night will be very long indeed." As if in response to his words, the fog seemed to press closer against the windows, and the ancient timbers of Blackmore Hall creaked ominously in the winter wind. The whisper in the winter fog had claimed its first victim, but somehow I knew that before dawn broke over the Yorkshire moors, Hercule Poirot would unravel every thread of this dark tapestry of deception and murder. The game, as they say, was afoot. Dr. Marsh bent closer to Sir Montague's still form, her professional instincts overriding the shock that had momentarily paralyzed the rest of us. The peculiar scent she had detected seemed to grow more pronounced as she examined him, and I watched her nostrils flare slightly as she tried to identify its source. "This odor," she murmured, more to herself than to the assembled company. "It's definitely not natural. Sweet, almost floral, but with an underlying bitterness that's quite distinctive." She looked up at Poirot, her expression troubled. "I've encountered something similar before, but I cannot place it exactly." Poirot had been moving about the library with that characteristic feline grace of his hands clasped behind his back, his grey eyes cataloguing every detail. He paused beside a small side table near Sir Montague's chair, where a cut-glass decanter of brandy sat alongside two balloon glasses. One glass was half full, the amber liquid catching the candlelight, while the other contained merely a thin film at the bottom, as though someone had taken the merest sip before setting it aside. "Interesting," he observed quietly. "Sir Montague, he was not drinking alone this evening, it would seem." Lady Vivian's gloved hands twisted together nervously. "He often took a small brandy after dinner," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For his nerves. The fog always made him unsettled." "And his companion in this evening's libation?" Poirot inquired gently, his gaze moving from face to face. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the relentless whisper of fog against the windows and the soft hiss of the fire. Each person in the room seemed to withdraw into themselves, as if suddenly aware that they were no longer merely guests at a pleasant evening gathering, but potential suspects in something far more sinister. Roderick Blackmore shifted uncomfortably near the bookshelf where he had positioned himself. "If someone had the combination to the safe," he said abruptly, "that rather narrows the field, doesn't it? Only Father and Miss Ashford knew it." Miss Ashford's composure remained remarkable under the circumstances, though I noticed a slight tightening around her green eyes. "Sir Montague changed the combination just last month," she confirmed. "The previous one had been the same for years, his wedding anniversary, but he felt it had become too predictable." "And you, mademoiselle," Poirot said, turning those penetrating grey eyes upon her. "You memorized this new combination at Sir Montague's request?" "Yes. He said it was necessary in case of emergency. After I committed it to memory, he destroyed the paper on which he had written it." "Most prudent," Poirot murmured. "And today, how many times did you access the safe?" Miss Ashford considered carefully. "3 times. Once this morning when Sir Montague asked me to confirm the manuscript was secure. Again at midday to retrieve some family documents he needed, and finally just before dinner to place a sealed envelope inside." "A sealed envelope?" Lady Vivian looked up sharply. "Montague said nothing to me about any letter." "It was addressed to Master Roderick," Miss Ashford replied quietly. "Sir Montague instructed me that it was to be given to him only in the event of—" She paused, color rising in her cheeks. In the event of his death, the implication hung in the air like incense, heavy and ominous. Roderick's face had gone even paler, if such a thing were possible, and his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "How perfectly convenient," he said bitterly, then seemed to realize how his words might be interpreted. "I mean, the timing is rather extraordinary, isn't it?" Pembroke appeared in the doorway, his dignified bearing intact despite the extraordinary circumstances. "Begging your pardon, Monsieur Poirot, but I've secured all the exterior doors and windows as requested. I'm afraid the telephone lines are down. The fog has brought down the wires somewhere along the Moor Road. The motor cars are quite unusable in these conditions, and the drive is completely obscured." "Merci, Pembroke," Poirot said calmly. "We are, it seems, quite effectively isolated until morning." He moved to examine a small silver box on the sideboard, its contents a neat array of throat pastilles. He wafted his hand above it delicately, then did the same over the brandy glasses, as though comparing invisible perfumes. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, turning back to face us all, "we find ourselves in a most unique situation. Until the fog lifts and normal communication can be restored, we must make the best of our circumstances. I suggest we remove to the drawing room, where we might be more comfortable while we await the authorities." As we began to file out of the library, leaving Sir Montague's body in its peaceful repose, I caught sight of Poirot's expression in the flickering candlelight. His eyes held that familiar gleam that I had learned to recognize, the look of a man whose little grey cells had already begun to work upon a problem of considerable complexity. The whisper in the winter fog had claimed its first victim, but I was certain that before dawn broke over the Yorkshire moors, Hercule Poirot would unravel every thread of this dark tapestry. Poirot halted our procession in the corridor just outside the library door. "Pembroke," he said with quiet authority, "I require you to lock this room immediately and retain the key. Captain Hastings will witness this action. No one, and I emphasize this most particularly, no one is to enter the library without my express permission." The butler's dignified composure never wavered as he produced a heavy brass key and turned it in the lock with a decisive click. The sound seemed to echo through the fog-muffled corridors like a judgment. "The key shall remain in my possession, Monsieur Poirot," he confirmed with a slight bow. "Très bien. Now, let us remove to the drawing room, where we may conduct our business with proper comfort and illumination." The drawing room at Blackmore Hall provided a stark contrast to the scholarly intimacy of the library. Here was a chamber designed to impress, with soaring ceilings adorned with elaborate plasterwork and furniture, arranged in careful groupings that spoke of generations of formal entertaining. Yet tonight, with the fog pressing against the tall windows like ghostly fingers seeking entry, even this grand space felt oppressive and close. Pembroke had arranged oil lamps and candles with military precision, creating pools of warm light that only served to emphasize the shadows lurking in the corners. The assembled company settled themselves with the careful distance of people who had suddenly become strangers to one another, each choosing a position that offered both visibility and, perhaps more importantly, a clear view of potential exits. Poirot positioned himself before the marble fireplace, where a cheerful blaze did little to dispel the chill that seemed to emanate not from the weather outside, but from the growing realization that one among us was a murderer. He stood with his back to the flames, his hands clasped behind him, those remarkable grey eyes cataloguing every gesture, every expression, every telling detail. "Before we proceed further," he announced in his precise, accented English, "certain facts must be established with absolute clarity. Dr. Marsh, this peculiar scent you detected, can you be more specific about its nature?" Dr. Marsh straightened in her chair, her professional instincts overriding the shock that had momentarily paralyzed us all. "It was distinctive, Monsieur Poirot. Sweet, almost floral, but with an underlying bitterness that was quite pronounced. I've encountered something similar during my medical training in toxicology lectures, but I cannot place the exact compound. What I can say with certainty is that it was not natural to Sir Montague's condition. And the brandy glasses. You observed them closely? One was half full, the other contained merely a residue. The scent seemed concentrated near Sir Montague himself, but I detected traces of it around the brandy decanter as well. Poirot nodded thoughtfully, then turned his attention to Miss Ashford, who had maintained her remarkable composure throughout these revelations. "Mademoiselle, this sealed letter you placed in the safe for Master Roderick, when precisely did this occur?" "Just before dinner, Monsieur Poirot. Sir Montague sealed it himself and asked me to witness his signature on the envelope. He was quite specific that it should be given to Master Roderick only in the event of his death." The implications settled over the room like a shroud. Roderick's face had gone even paler, if such a thing were possible, and his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "There's something else," Miss Ashford continued quietly, her green eyes never leaving Poirot's face. "Something about the manuscript that you should know. Sir Montague had been considering selling it." Lady Vivian's carefully maintained composure cracked visibly. "Selling it? But it's been in the family for generations. Montague would never—" "I'm afraid he was quite serious, Lady Vivian. He had been in correspondence with several private collectors. There was to be an auction next month." Miss Ashford's voice remained steady, though I detected a tremor of emotion beneath her professional demeanor. The family's financial situation had become concerning. "That would explain his recent anxiety," Dr. Marsh observed. "Financial stress can be as damaging to a weak heart as any physical ailment." Poirot had moved to examine a silver letter opener on a nearby writing desk, picking it up with delicate precision. "So we have a man preparing to sell his family's greatest treasure, updating his will, and suffering from both physical and financial pressures." Most illuminating. As if summoned by his words, that familiar whisper drifted through the house once more, soft and sibilant, seeming to emanate from the very walls themselves. "The fog keeps its secrets, and so shall I." The sound sent ice through my veins, and I saw my own terror reflected in every face around the room. Someone among us was playing a most deadly game indeed. The ghostly whisper faded into the fog-muffled silence, leaving us all suspended in a moment of collective terror. I watched as each person's reaction revealed something of their character. Lady Vivian pressed a gloved hand to her throat, her composure finally cracking. Roderick's nervous energy transformed into something approaching panic as he glanced repeatedly toward the windows. Dr. Marsh maintained her professional demeanor, but gripped her medical bag more tightly, and Miss Ashford, that remarkable woman, simply sat straighter in her chair, her green eyes alert and calculating. Poirot, however, seemed almost pleased by this supernatural interruption. His grey eyes gleamed with that familiar light of intellectual curiosity, and I detected the faintest smile playing about his lips. "Enough," he said quietly, lifting his hand with quiet authority. "This whisper in the fog, it is a child's trick designed to frighten us from the truth. We will not be led by phantoms when there are facts to be arranged with proper order." He moved with his characteristic gliding step toward the center of the room. "We shall begin methodically, as all good investigations must proceed. I require to know the precise movements of each person from the moment we entered the library until the lights failed." He turned first to Lady Vivian, his manner respectful, yet penetrating. "Madame, if you would be so kind as to recount your actions this evening." Lady Vivian drew herself upright, one hand clasping the back of her chair as though for support. After dinner, we came directly to the library. Montague wished to show everyone the manuscript. He was quite insistent about it, though I thought the weather made it rather an odd evening for such a presentation. Her voice carried a tremor of emotion. I remained near the fireplace throughout. I did not approach the brandy decanter, nor did I leave the room at any point. "And you do not partake of spirits, I observe?" "Never," she confirmed. Montague knew this well. Poirot nodded thoughtfully, then addressed Dr. Marsh. "Doctor, your movements, if you please." I remained by the hearth, discussing Sir Montague's condition with him. I'd actually cautioned him against taking brandy, given his heart troubles, but he seemed determined to celebrate the evening. Her professional composure remained intact, though I noticed the slight tension in her voice. I did not drink anything myself, as I make it a practice never to consume alcohol when attending to patients. Most prudent. And you, Monsieur Roderick? Roderick shifted uncomfortably, his hands working against each other in that nervous gesture I'd already begun to associate with him. I was at the windows, watching the fog. It seemed to swallow everything, quite fascinating in its completeness. When Miss Ashford went to the safe, I turned to observe, naturally curious about the manuscript. I hardly moved from that position near the window throughout the evening. Poirot's penetrating gaze settled upon Miss Ashford. "And you, mademoiselle?" I crossed to the safe when Sir Montague requested it. I opened it, discovered the manuscript was missing, and searched again to be certain. She paused, and I detected the slightest hesitation before she continued. Then the lights flickered and failed. There is nothing else of significance to report. "Ah, but there is one thing more," Poirot said mildly, his tone deceptively casual. "The envelope you placed in the safe before dinner, the one addressed to Monsieur Roderick. When you opened the safe this evening, was that envelope present?" The silence that followed was profound. All eyes turned to Miss Ashford, and I saw a faint color rise beneath her composed exterior. "No," she admitted at last. "It was not there. I hesitated to mention it immediately because of the distress of the moment, but Sir Montague's instructions were quite explicit about its contents being for Master Roderick alone." Roderick's face had gone even paler. What could father have written that was so urgent it required such dramatic timing? That, mon ami, remains to be discovered. But first, we must address the matter of the brandy. Poirot moved to position himself where he could observe all of us clearly. 2 glasses were present, one half full, one containing merely a residue. Sir Montague did not drink alone, who shared his evening libation. The question hung in the air like incense. Lady Vivian shook her head. "I did not touch spirits, as I have said." "Nor I," added Dr. Marsh. "I had advised against it." Roderick's response came quickly, perhaps too quickly. "I prefer whiskey when I drink at all. I did not touch father's brandy." Miss Ashford met Poirot's gaze directly. "The second glass was mine," she said with quiet dignity. "Sir Montague pressed it upon me when we were examining the family documents earlier. I took only the merest sip to humor him before setting it aside. The taste was peculiar." "Peculiar in what manner?" "Sweet, but with an underlying bitterness that was quite pronounced. I assumed it was the quality of the brandy. Sir Montague favored very old, complex spirits." Dr. Marsh leaned forward with professional interest. "That description matches the scent I detected around Sir Montague's body. Sweet and floral, but with that distinctive bitter undertone. In my toxicology studies, I encountered something similar. An alkaloid compound, rare and fast-acting, often masked by sweetening agents." The implications settled over the room like a shroud. Someone had introduced a poison into the brandy, but the question remained. Had Sir Montague been the intended victim, or had Miss Ashford's mere sip saved her from a more sinister fate? "We must examine the safe once more," Poirot announced. "Pembroke, if you would be so kind as to unlock the library again. We shall disturb nothing, but certain details require verification." We followed him back through the fog-muffled corridors, our footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. The library received us with its heavy atmosphere and that lingering sweetness in the air, like flowers pressed too long between book pages. Poirot moved directly to the concealed safe, gesturing for Miss Ashford to open it once more. As the heavy door swung open, Poirot leaned in carefully, breathing delicately. "The same scent family as near Sir Montague's chair," he murmured. "But fainter. Here. Most illuminating." He indicated a tiny crimson fragment on the small table beneath the safe. Sealing wax, he observed, lifting it with the tip of his visiting card. Red wax, I observed. The envelope was sealed with this. Yes, Miss Ashford confirmed, her voice barely above a whisper. And now both the manuscript and the letter have vanished, though the safe shows no signs of forced entry. Poirot closed the safe door with a decisive click and turned to face us all. We return to the drawing room. I shall conduct private interviews with each of you in turn. The truth, mes amis, lies not in supernatural whispers, but in the very human motives and actions of those present in this house tonight. As we filed back through the corridors, I noticed Poirot's expression in the flickering candlelight. His little grey cells were working furiously, and I could see that he was beginning to perceive the pattern hidden beneath the layers of deception and misdirection that surrounded us like the fog itself. Back in the drawing room, Poirot arranged the seating with his characteristic precision, ensuring each chair faced the fire at a proper angle while maintaining clear sight lines throughout the chamber. He requested that Pembroke prepare a small adjoining room for private interviews, and within minutes the butler had transformed the morning room into a suitable consultation space with adequate lighting and comfortable chairs. Captain Hastings, Poirot said quietly as he surveyed the arrangement, I require you to remain with our assembled company while I conduct these interviews. Sometimes what people do when they believe themselves unobserved reveals more than any direct questioning. I positioned myself near the fireplace where I could maintain a clear view of the remaining suspects. The fog continued its relentless assault upon the windows, and with each passing hour, the house seemed to settle deeper into its shroud of mystery. Poirot began with Pembroke, whose dignified bearing remained unshaken despite the extraordinary circumstances. Through the partially open door, I could hear fragments of their conversation, and when the butler emerged, there was something in his manner that suggested he had provided information of considerable significance. Tell me, Pembroke, I heard Poirot say as the butler prepared to leave, the brandy decanter, who tends to its preparation? I do, Monsieur Poirot. I decanted a fresh bottle at 5 o'clock this evening and placed it in the library, as Sir Montague preferred it to breathe before consumption. No member of the household staff is permitted to handle the Blackmore brandy save myself. And you heard nothing unusual this evening? Pembroke hesitated, his professional discretion warring with the gravity of the situation. Shortly before dinner, as I passed the corridor, I heard voices in the library. One was unmistakably Sir Montague's. The other was quieter, more agitated. I could not distinguish the words, but the tone was urgent, almost pleading. When I brought the soup course, the voices had ceased. Lady Vivian was summoned next, and I watched her compose herself with visible effort before following Poirot into the morning room. While they spoke, I observed the remaining suspects carefully. Roderick had positioned himself near the bookshelf, ostensibly examining volumes, but his attention clearly lay elsewhere. His nervous energy had transformed into something approaching agitation, and his eyes repeatedly darted toward the corridor leading to the library. Dr. Marsh maintained her professional composure, but I detected subtle signs of strain in how she gripped her medical bag. Miss Ashford presented the most intriguing study. Her remarkable self-possession remained intact, but there was a quality of watchful calculation in her manner that suggested she was conducting her own private investigation. When Lady Vivian emerged from her interview, her composure had cracked further. She moved with the careful steps of someone fighting to maintain control, and I noticed her gloved hands shook visibly as she resumed her seat. "Madame," I had heard Poirot say during their consultation, "this disagreement with your husband before dinner, it concerned the manuscript?" "I begged him not to proceed with the sale," she admitted. "It represents our family's history, Monsieur Poirot." But Montague insisted that history would not satisfy the creditors. Her voice carried a tremor of emotion. "We quarreled, yes, but disagreement is not hatred." Roderick's interview proved brief but intense. When he emerged, his face was flushed and his earlier nervous energy had transformed into something approaching panic. He immediately moved to the windows, staring into the impenetrable fog as though seeking escape. "Your father's letter," Poirot had pressed him. "What did you expect it to contain?" "Instructions about debts, perhaps," Roderick had replied, his voice tight with anxiety. "There have been miscalculations in my investments. Father knew I needed guidance." He had produced a small tin of throat pastille when Poirot inquired about his movements. Parma violet, Poirot had noted with interest, examining the tin briefly before returning it. Dr. Marsh's consultation lasted longer, filled with technical discussion about Sir Montague's condition and the possible effects of various compounds upon a weakened heart. When she returned, her professional mask had slipped slightly, revealing genuine concern. "My medical bag remained by the hearth during dinner," she had confirmed. "It contains digitalis, morphine, and nitroglycerin, among other medications, all secured in numbered, wax-sealed vials. None have been tampered with, though others could theoretically have accessed the bag." Finally, Miss Ashford's interview proved the longest and most revealing. When she emerged nearly 30 minutes later, her composure remained intact, but there was something different in her manner, a quality of resolution, perhaps. "The manuscript sale," Poirot had inquired. "Sir Montague was determined to proceed." "Absolutely. He had set a reserve price sufficient to discharge the family's immediate obligations. He meant to protect them all, however harsh his methods seemed." She paused, then added quietly, "The letter for Master Roderick contained the truth about their financial situation. Sir Montague believed that truth must be faced without dramatics." Poirot returned to the drawing-room with that familiar gleam in his grey eyes that I had learned to recognize as significant progress. He positioned himself before the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back, surveying the assembled company with the air of a man beginning to perceive patterns hidden beneath surface chaos. "These consultations have been most illuminating," he announced. "Certain facts have emerged that cast new light upon our situation. We have a man pressed by financial necessity, a family torn between sentiment and survival, and a household where secrets whisper in corners like the fog itself." As if summoned by his words, Pembroke appeared in the doorway with unusual urgency beneath his dignified bearing. "Begging your pardon, Monsieur Poirot, but there has been a development requiring your immediate attention." The butler's carefully controlled tone sent a chill through the assembled company. "The library, sir. Despite the door remaining locked and the key in my possession throughout the evening, there are clear signs that someone has accessed the room since our last visit." The implications settled over us like a physical weight. If someone had entered the locked library while we were all accounted for in the drawing-room, then either we faced supernatural forces, which Poirot would never accept, or someone among us possessed skills and knowledge that had not yet been revealed. "Show me," Poirot commanded, and we rose to follow him back through the fog-muffled corridors, each wondering what new impossibility awaited us in that chamber of secrets. The winter fog pressed against the windows with renewed intensity, and somewhere in the darkness beyond, I fancied I could hear that whisper again. Soft, mocking, triumphant, reminding us that the night's revelations were far from complete. Pembroke led us through the fog-muffled corridors with his characteristic dignity intact, though I detected an underlying tension in his measured steps. The heavy brass key turned in the library lock with the same decisive click as before, yet as the door swung inward, even I could sense that something fundamental had changed within that scholarly sanctuary. The atmosphere struck me immediately. That peculiar sweetness had intensified, becoming almost cloying in its persistence. Poirot stepped across the threshold with his characteristic feline grace, his grey eyes already cataloguing details that escaped my notice. He moved first to Sir Montague's chair, where our host remained in his peaceful repose, then began a systematic examination of the chamber. "Observe, Hastings," he murmured, indicating the Persian carpet near the hearth. "The pile has been disturbed here, and here again near the writing desk. Someone has moved through this room with purpose, searching for something specific." He knelt beside the fireplace, where the embers had died to a dull glow. But more interesting still, the ash has been disturbed. Using his handkerchief, Poirot carefully lifted fragments from the grey remains. Several pieces of red sealing wax caught the candlelight like tiny garnets, and among the charred paper scraps I could make out the partial remains of what had once been elegant script. The curve of an R was clearly visible, followed by what appeared to be the upright stroke of a D. "The letter addressed to Master Roderick," Poirot announced quietly. "It has been removed from the safe and burned here, within the last hour." Roderick's face went ashen. "But that's impossible. The room has been locked, and we've all been together in the drawing room." "Impossible, perhaps, but indubitably true." Poirot rose and moved to examine the brandy decanter with renewed attention. The scent near these glasses has changed as well. Stronger now, more concentrated. Someone has returned to add more of the poisonous compound, perhaps hoping to mask the original traces. Dr. Marsh stepped forward, her professional instincts overriding the shock of the moment. "Monsieur Poirot, there is something else that requires your attention." She indicated Sir Montague's neck, where a tiny puncture mark was barely visible beneath his collar. "This was not present during my initial examination. Someone has used a hypodermic needle to withdraw a blood sample post-mortem." The implication sent a chill through the assembled company. Poirot examined the minute wound with his jeweler's loupe, his expression growing increasingly grave. "Medical knowledge, access to proper equipment, and the ability to enter a locked room undetected. Our adversary possesses considerable skill." It was then that Poirot's attention was drawn to the tall bookshelf opposite the hearth. He ran his finger along the leather spines with practiced precision, pausing at a volume that seemed somehow out of place among its companions. "Here is disorder in a household of perfect order," he observed. "This volume of Goldsmith has been misfiled between Gibbon and Godwin." He pressed the book inward with his palm, and somewhere within the woodwork, a mechanism clicked softly. "Mes amis, I believe we have discovered the solution to our locked room mystery." He pressed a carved acanthus leaf in the decorative molding, and before our astonished eyes, a narrow panel, scarcely wider than a man's shoulders, swung inward on silent hinges, revealing a dark passage that descended at a gentle angle into the depths of the house. "The old servants' passages," Pembroke breathed, his professional composure finally cracking. "I had forgotten they still existed. They were sealed decades ago when the house was modernized." Poirot produced his pocket torch, its beam revealing fresh footprints in the dust that had accumulated over the years. The prints were small and neat, with a distinctive chip in the left heel that would serve as a signature to anyone observant enough to notice. On the rough wooden jamb, caught on a protruding screw head, a single auburn hair glinted in the torchlight. "The whisper in the fog," Poirot announced with quiet satisfaction, "has revealed its method at last. These passages connect throughout the house, allowing our mysterious visitor to move unseen while maintaining the appearance of innocence." Miss Ashford's remarkable composure remained intact, though I noticed she had grown very still. "Many people in this house have auburn hair, Monsieur Poirot," she said quietly, "and more than one person wears shoes of that size." "Indeed, mademoiselle. But few would possess the intimate knowledge required to operate these mechanisms or the medical expertise to withdraw blood samples with such precision." Poirot closed the panel with a gentle push, the bookshelf resuming its innocent appearance. We returned to the drawing room, where certain truths must finally be spoken aloud. As we filed out of the library, that familiar whisper seemed to drift through the passages one final time. Fainter now, as though its power had been diminished by discovery. Poirot paused in the corridor, his head tilted as though listening to something only he could hear. "The house speaks when one knows how to make it whisper," he murmured to me as we walked. "But whispers, mon ami, can be traced to their source, and when they are, the truth follows as surely as dawn follows the darkest night." The fog continued its relentless assault upon Blackmore Hall, but I sensed that its concealing power was beginning to wane. Hercule Poirot had penetrated the heart of the mystery, and I knew that before much longer, the whisper in the winter fog would be silenced forever by the clear voice of justice. Back in the drawing room, Poirot positioned himself before the fireplace with the deliberate precision of a conductor preparing to guide his orchestra through a particularly intricate passage. The assembled company had unconsciously arranged themselves in a semicircle, each maintaining the careful distances of people who had suddenly discovered they could no longer trust their companions. The fog continued its relentless assault upon the windows, but I sensed that its concealing power was beginning to wane against the methodical investigation of Hercule Poirot. Before we proceed further, Poirot announced, his grey eyes moving systematically from face to face, we must establish with absolute clarity the facts that are now beyond dispute. Sir Montague Blackmore was murdered by poison, a compound that produces the distinctive sweet floral scent with bitter undertones that Dr. Marsh so astutely identified. The Blackmore manuscript has vanished from a locked safe. A sealed letter addressed to Master Roderick has been removed and destroyed. Most significantly, someone with intimate knowledge of this house's hidden architecture has been moving unseen among us, manipulating evidence in a supposedly secured room. He paused, allowing the weight of these revelations to settle upon the company like a shroud. Lady Vivian's composure had deteriorated further during our absence, and she now pressed a trembling handkerchief to her lips. Roderick's nervous energy had transformed into something approaching panic, while Miss Ashford maintained her remarkable self-possession, though I detected a subtle tension in her posture. The poison used tonight, Poirot continued, required considerable knowledge of chemistry and pharmacology. It was not the crude weapon of desperation, but the calculated tool of someone with medical training. His penetrating gaze settled upon Dr. Marsh. Doctor, when did you last inventory the contents of your medical bag? Dr. Marsh's professional composure remained intact, though I noticed the slight tightening around her eyes. This morning, before leaving my surgery. Everything was properly accounted for then. She opened her bag with swift efficiency, examining each labeled vial with growing concern. The digitalis preparation is lighter than it should be. Perhaps 2 therapeutic doses worth of the compound are missing. Digitalis, Poirot mused thoughtfully. In proper doses, a medication for the heart. In larger quantities, a deadly poison that produces exactly the symptoms we observed. Sweet-scented when combined with alcohol, bitter to the taste, and fatal to a compromised heart within minutes. The implications sent a visible shudder through the assembled company. Someone had not only accessed Dr. Marsh's medical supplies, but possessed the knowledge to use them as instruments of murder. However, Poirot continued, we must also examine the physical evidence that cannot be disputed by medical theory. He turned to Pembroke with quiet authority. Would you be so kind as to fetch the outdoor shoes belonging to each member of our company? We have, you will recall, discovered distinctive footprints in the hidden passage. Within minutes, Pembroke had arranged a discreet collection of footwear upon a silver tray. Lady Vivian's elegant walking boots, Roderick's polished brogues, Dr. Marsh's sensible Oxfords, and Miss Ashford's neat black pumps. Poirot examined each with his jeweler's loupe, paying particular attention to the left heel of each shoe. Observe, he announced, lifting Miss Ashford's left pump toward the candlelight. A small triangular chip was clearly visible on the heel's edge, matching precisely the distinctive mark we had discovered in the dusty passage. The evidence speaks with remarkable clarity, does it not? Miss Ashford met his gaze directly, her green eyes steady despite the damning revelation. Those shoes were repaired last month, Monsieur Poirot. The cobbler remarked that the leather had split along the edge. A coincidence is not necessarily evidence of guilt. Indeed, mademoiselle. But when coincidences multiply, they begin to form patterns that demand explanation. Poirot set the shoe aside with careful precision. Between our last visit to the library and Pembroke's discovery of the disturbance, Where precisely were you? Here, in this room, with all of you, she replied calmly. Captain Hastings can verify my presence. I found myself thrust into the uncomfortable position of corroborating her alibi. It is true, I confirmed reluctantly. Miss Ashford was present throughout our discussions. There was only a brief moment when Pembroke brought refreshments and a cup was accidentally displaced. Miss Ashford rose to fetch a cloth from the sideboard. 40 seconds, Poirot supplied with mathematical precision. Sufficient time, if one knows the house intimately, to access a hidden panel, descend a few steps, and emerge in the library to conduct urgent business. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the whisper of fog against the windows and the soft hiss of the dying fire. Miss Ashford's remarkable composure finally showed signs of strain, though her dignity remained intact. "Very well," she said quietly. "Yes, I used the passage. I discovered it months ago while cataloguing the library's contents. I took the letter because Sir Montague had written in haste and anger, and I feared its contents would cause irreparable harm to the family he meant to protect." Lady Vivian leaned forward with desperate urgency. "Cordelia, what did the letter contain?" Miss Ashford's gaze moved to Roderick, then back to Poirot. "The true extent of the family's debts and specific instructions for Master Roderick regarding certain financial entanglements. Sir Montague had discovered the gambling debts, the arrangement with unsavory creditors who might accept valuable items in lieu of monetary payment. The letter contained not just acknowledgement, but ultimatums that would have driven Master Roderick to desperate measures." Roderick's face had gone completely white. "Father knew everything," he whispered. "The debts, the creditors, even the discussions about using the manuscript as collateral." "Indeed," Poirot confirmed. "And you believed that with the letter destroyed and your father silenced, your secrets would remain hidden. But you underestimated the persistence of truth, mon ami." As if summoned by the intensity of the moment, that familiar whisper drifted through the house once more. "The fog keeps its secrets, and so shall I." But this time, I noticed something crucial. The whisper seemed to emanate not from the walls themselves, but from a specific source. Following the sound with my eyes, I found myself staring directly at Miss Ashford. Poirot had noticed as well, and his grey eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "The voice of the fog," he murmured, "speaks with a human throat after all. Mademoiselle, your theatrical talents are considerable, but they have served to conceal, rather than reveal, the truth." Miss Ashford's composure finally cracked, revealing the strain she had been concealing beneath her professional demeanor. "I sought only to protect them," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sir Montague was a good man driven to harsh measures by circumstances beyond his control. Master Roderick is weak, not evil. I thought if I could eliminate the immediate pressures." "By eliminating Sir Montague himself?" Poirot's question hung in the air like a judgment. The accusation seemed to strike her like a physical blow, but she straightened with visible effort. "No, Monsieur Poirot. I burned the letter, yes, and I used the passages to move unseen. But I did not poison Sir Montague. That crime belongs to another." Poirot nodded thoughtfully, his expression suggesting that this denial had been expected. "Then we must determine who among us possessed not only the medical knowledge to steal and administer digitalis, but also the motive to ensure that Sir Montague's financial revelations would never see the light of day." His grey eyes moved systematically across the assembled company, and I realized that despite the dramatic revelations of the past hour, Hercule Poirot was far from finished with his investigation. The whisper in the winter fog had revealed some of its secrets, but the most deadly truth remained hidden beneath layers of deception that only his little grey cells could fully unravel. The night's revelations were far from complete, and I sensed that before dawn broke over the Yorkshire moors, justice would finally penetrate the fog that had concealed murder at Blackmore Hall. Poirot moved with deliberate precision toward the brandy decanter, his grey eyes cataloguing every detail with the methodical attention of a scientist conducting a crucial experiment. The assembled company watched in tense silence as he lifted the crystal stopper and inhaled delicately, his nostrils flaring with that characteristic precision I had learned to associate with significant discoveries. "The scent remains consistent," he announced quietly. "But there are layers here that require careful analysis. Sweet, floral, bitter, but the floral note is very specific. Not a generic sweetness, but something distinctive, almost exotic in its precision." He set the decanter aside and turned his penetrating gaze upon Dr. Marsh. "Doctor, when you first detected this peculiar odor around Sir Montague's body, you hesitated before identifying it as digitalis. Why this uncertainty from someone of your considerable medical expertise?" Dr. Marsh's professional composure showed the first hairline cracks under his scrutiny. "The combination of scents was unexpected. I needed a moment to separate the components and identify the active compound." "Indeed. And during that moment of analysis, you also sampled the brandy yourself, did you not? For diagnostic purposes, as you so carefully phrased it." Poirot's tone remained courteous, but I detected the steel beneath the silk. "Tell me, what did you taste?" "The bitterness of digitalis, certainly. But there was something else. A masking agent of some kind, sweet and floral, designed to make the poison more palatable." Poirot nodded thoughtfully, then moved closer to where Dr. Marsh sat. His attention seemed caught by something almost imperceptible, the faint but persistent aroma that surrounded her person. "This masking agent, Doctor, would you say it resembled the scent of Parma violets?" The question struck her like a physical blow. Her hands, which had remained steady throughout the evening's revelations, began to tremble almost imperceptibly. It's possible. Parma violet essence has a distinctive sweet profile that could theoretically mask bitter compounds." "Theoretically, yes. But in this case, quite practically." Poirot indicated the delicate handkerchief that protruded from her sleeve, its fabric clearly scented with the same distinctive perfume. "You carry this scent with you always, do you not? A personal preference that proved most convenient when you required a masking agent for your deadly preparation." Dr. Marsh's carefully constructed facade began to crumble before our eyes. "My handkerchief is merely a personal choice, Monsieur Poirot. Many women use scented linens. Indeed they do, but few possess both the medical knowledge to calculate precise dosages of digitalis and the specific aromatic compounds necessary to disguise its bitter taste so effectively." Poirot's voice carried the inexorable weight of mathematical certainty. "The post-mortem blood sample you withdrew, this was not merely to confirm the presence of poison, but to verify the exact concentration you had administered. You needed to ensure your calculations had been precise, that the combination of alcohol and digitalis would prove fatal without leaving obvious traces of deliberate murder." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the whisper of fog against the windows and the soft hiss of the dying fire. Dr. Marsh sat frozen in her chair, her professional dignity cracking like ice under pressure. "But why?" Lady Vivian's voice cracked with disbelief. "Helena, you've been our family physician for years. You saved Montague's life during his first attack. Why would you—" "Because," Poirot said gently, "Dr. Marsh had discovered that Sir Montague's financial investigations had uncovered something far more damaging than mere gambling debts or manuscript sales. Tell me, Doctor, what did Sir Montague find in his review of medical expenses that threatened to destroy not just your practice, but your entire life?" Dr. Marsh's composure finally shattered completely. Her hands shook visibly as she gripped her medical bag, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "He discovered the discrepancies, the prescriptions that didn't match the recorded treatments, the medications that were billed but never administered." "You had been systematically defrauding the family for months," Poirot continued with quiet certainty. "Using your position as their trusted physician to inflate medical expenses, selling unused medications, perhaps even prolonging Sir Montague's treatment unnecessarily to justify additional charges. His financial crisis forced him to scrutinize every expense, and your careful scheme began to unravel. I never meant for it to go so far, Dr. Marsh admitted, her professional mask finally slipping away entirely. But the practice was failing, my other patients were leaving, and the Blackmores trusted me completely. It seemed harmless at first, a few extra charges here and there, some medications that weren't strictly necessary, but weren't harmful either. Until Sir Montague began asking questions about bills that seemed excessive for routine cardiac care, Poirot observed. He threatened to audit your records, perhaps even report his suspicions to the medical board. Your career, your reputation, everything you had worked for would have been destroyed. Dr. Marsh rose from her chair with the slow, deliberate movements of someone accepting inevitable defeat. I couldn't let that happen. I had devoted my life to medicine, to helping people. One mistake, one moment of weakness, and it would all have been for nothing. So you decided to eliminate the threat by eliminating Sir Montague himself, Poirot concluded. The missing digitalis from your medical bag was not stolen by another. You removed it yourself, using your knowledge of his condition and his evening habits to calculate the precise dosage that would prove fatal when combined with alcohol. Miss Ashford, who had been listening with growing understanding, spoke quietly. The whisper in the fog. You used my discovery of the passages to your advantage. While I was burning the letter, you were manipulating the evidence in the library. Indeed, Poirot confirmed. While Miss Ashford acted from misguided loyalty, Dr. Marsh used the same passages to ensure her crime would appear accidental. The additional poison in the brandy decanter, the post-mortem blood sample, all designed to create the impression of a tragic overdose rather than deliberate murder. Dr. Marsh stood in the center of the drawing room, her professional dignity in ruins, her carefully constructed life crumbling around her like the fog that had concealed her movements throughout the evening. Outside, I noticed that the relentless mist was beginning to show the first signs of lifting, as though the revelation of truth had somehow weakened its concealing power. I never intended for it to become so complicated, she whispered. I simply wanted to protect what I had built, to continue helping my patients. But once I began, each lie required another. Each deception demanded greater risks. Poirot regarded her with something approaching pity. The tragedy, Doctor, is that your patients would have been far better served by a physician who valued their lives more than her own reputation. The whisper in the winter fog has finally been silenced, not by supernatural forces, but by the methodical application of logic and the inexorable pursuit of justice. As if summoned by his words, the fog outside began to thin perceptibly, revealing the first faint outlines of the Yorkshire landscape beyond. The night's revelations had stripped away every layer of deception, leaving only the stark truth of murder disguised as medical care. Dr. Marsh stood before us, no longer the competent professional who had arrived that evening, but a broken woman whose attempt to preserve her life's work had destroyed everything she claimed to hold dear. The whisper in the winter fog had claimed its victim, but Hercule Poirot had ensured that justice would penetrate even the deepest mist of deception and lies. Dr. Marsh stood in the center of the drawing room like a broken marionette, her confession hanging in the air with the weight of absolute finality. The fog outside continued its gradual retreat, and I noticed that Poirot's attention had shifted from the defeated physician to something that had been troubling him throughout the evening, a detail that remained unresolved despite the dramatic revelation of murder. There remains, he announced with quiet authority, one final thread that must be woven into our tapestry of truth. Dr. Marsh has confessed to the murder of Sir Montague, but the question of the missing manuscript still requires resolution. A priceless document does not simply vanish, even in the most carefully orchestrated crime. His gray eyes moved systematically across the room, cataloging every detail with that characteristic precision I had learned to associate with significant discoveries. They settled upon a small ottoman positioned near the window, an elegant piece upholstered in green damask that had served throughout the evening as a convenient resting place for Miss Ashford's leather portfolio. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said gently, addressing Miss Ashford directly, "your knowledge of this house's hidden architecture has proven most useful tonight, but I suspect your familiarity with its furnishings has been equally valuable. The ottoman, it is not merely decorative, is it?" Miss Ashford's remarkable composure finally showed hairline cracks. "I don't understand what you mean, Monsieur Poirot." "Ah, but I think you do." Poirot moved to the ottoman with his characteristic gliding step. "Observe the brass fittings along the base. They are not merely ornamental, and the slight depression in the upholstery suggests regular access to a concealed compartment." With practiced efficiency, he located a hidden clasp and lifted the padded top. The Blackmore manuscript lay within, wrapped in protective oilcloth and nestled like a sleeping treasure. The ancient vellum pages seemed to glow in the candlelight, their illuminated letters as vibrant as the day they were created centuries ago. Lady Vivian gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "Cordelia, my dear girl." Miss Ashford's composure cracked completely, tears streaming down her face as the full weight of her deception became clear. "I removed it this morning," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. Sir Montague was so determined to proceed with the sale, so convinced it was the only solution to our difficulties. "I couldn't bear to see it leave the family forever." "And so you hid it here," Poirot observed, "where you could watch over it throughout the evening, where no thief would think to look, and where your position as private secretary gave you legitimate reason to access the room at any time." "But there's more, isn't there?" I ventured, remembering the fragments of conversation I had overheard. "The forged correspondence, the false promises to creditors. You've been actively undermining Sir Montague's attempts to resolve the family's financial crisis." Miss Ashford nodded miserably. "I thought if I could delay the creditors, find alternative solutions, perhaps convince Sir Montague that the manuscript sale wasn't necessary. But everything I touched seemed to make the situation worse. The pressure on him increased, his health deteriorated, and I realized I had trapped him in an impossible situation." Poirot regarded her with something approaching pity. "The tragedy, mademoiselle, is that your well-intentioned interference created the very desperation that Dr. Marsh exploited. Sir Montague's discovery of your activities, combined with his growing suspicions about inflated medical expenses, created a perfect storm of financial and personal crisis." Dr. Marsh, who had been listening with growing understanding, finally found her voice. "When I overheard Sir Montague confronting you about the forged letters, I realized that his investigation would inevitably uncover my own irregularities. I couldn't allow that to happen." "And so you decided to eliminate the threat permanently," Poirot concluded. "The digitalis from your medical bag, masked with Parma violet essence and administered through the brandy, a method that would appear natural given Sir Montague's cardiac condition." Through the tall windows, dawn was beginning to break over the Yorkshire moors, its pale light revealing a landscape transformed by the retreating mist. The whisper in the winter fog had finally been silenced, not by supernatural forces, but by the methodical application of logic and the inexorable pursuit of justice. Pembroke appeared in the doorway with his characteristic dignity. "The telephone lines have been restored, monsieur. Poirot, I have taken the liberty of contacting the local constabulary." Poirot straightened his waistcoat with characteristic precision. "Très bien. Justice, like dawn itself, arrives with inexorable certainty for those patient enough to await its coming." As the morning light grew stronger, I found myself reflecting on the night's revelations. Two women, each acting from noble motives, one to preserve family heritage, the other to protect professional reputation, had created a web of deception that ultimately led to murder. The fog was lifting, but the shadows cast by human nature would linger long after the Yorkshire sun had burned away the last wisps of mist. The sound of approaching motors announced the arrival of the authorities, their headlamps cutting through the dawn like harbingers of justice finally served. The sound of approaching motors announced the arrival of Inspector Bradshaw of the Yorkshire Constabulary, whose efficient competence was evident in every measured step as he entered Blackmore Hall with 2 constables. A sturdy, methodical officer with keen eyes that missed little, he took in the drawn faces, the lingering tension, and the strange hush that persisted even as dawn thinned the fog pressing against the tall windows. "Monsieur Poirot," Inspector Bradshaw said with respectful acknowledgement, "I understand we have a situation of some complexity here. Perhaps you would be so kind as to guide me through the sequence of events." Poirot stepped forward with characteristic precision, his grey eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of a puzzle finally completed. "Indeed, Inspector, we have murder most carefully planned, theft born of misguided loyalty, and the manipulation of appearances designed to conceal the truth. But the little grey cells, they have arranged the facts in their proper order, and justice may now be served." He positioned himself before the fireplace, where the morning light streaming through the cleared windows illuminated the assembled company with pitiless clarity. Dr. Marsh stood with shoulders slumped in defeat, while Miss Ashford maintained her remarkable composure despite the tear tracks on her pale cheeks. Lady Vivian and Roderick sat with the careful distance of people who had discovered they could no longer trust their own judgment about human nature. "The crime began with desperation, Inspector," Poirot announced, his accented English carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "Sir Montague Blackmore faced financial ruin, and his investigation into family expenses had uncovered 2 disturbing truths. First, the extent of his son's gambling debts and the dangerous creditors who threatened the family's security. Second, and far more damaging, systematic fraud perpetrated by his trusted family physician." Inspector Bradshaw's pen moved steadily across his notebook as Poirot continued with methodical precision. Dr. Helena Marsh had been exploiting her position for months, inflating medical bills, charging for unnecessary treatments, and selling medications that were billed but never administered. When Sir Montague threatened to audit her records and report his findings to the medical board, she realized her entire career would be destroyed. Dr. Marsh's voice, when she finally spoke, carried the flat tone of someone beyond the reach of shame. 20 years of dedicated service, reduced to nothing by a moment of financial desperation. I couldn't allow that to happen. "And so you decided to eliminate the threat permanently," Poirot observed. "Using your medical knowledge, you extracted digitalis from your own supplies, a medication that, in proper doses, treats heart conditions, but in larger quantities becomes a deadly poison. You masked its bitter taste with Parma violet essence, the same scent you carry on your personal linens, and administered it through Sir Montague's evening brandy." The inspector looked up from his notes. "The physical evidence supports this completely. The missing digitalis from Dr. Marsh's medical bag, the distinctive sweet and bitter scent detected around the victim, and the post-mortem blood sample she withdrew to verify her dosage, all point irrevocably to premeditated murder." Poirot indicated the brandy decanter, still positioned where it had been discovered. She even returned to the library through the hidden passages to add more poison, hoping to create the impression of accidental overdose. Miss Ashford, who had been listening with growing understanding, spoke quietly. "While I was burning Sir Montague's letter, Dr. Marsh was manipulating evidence to conceal her crime. Indeed, mademoiselle, your own actions, though well-intentioned, provided the perfect cover for murder. The footprints in the passage, the auburn hair caught on the wooden jamb, these were traces of your misguided attempt to protect the family honor by destroying evidence of Roderick's debts." Inspector Bradshaw closed his notebook with decisive authority. "Dr. Helena Marsh, I must arrest you for the murder of Sir Montague Blackmore." As the constables moved forward, Dr. Marsh offered no resistance, her professional dignity finally crumbling completely. "I did save him once," she whispered to Lady Vivian as she passed. "Tonight I failed him entirely. The resolution of Miss Ashford's situation proved more complex, but Lady Vivian stepped forward with quiet determination. Cordelia has served this family with absolute devotion. Her actions were motivated by loyalty, not greed. We will not press charges regarding the manuscript. Inspector Bradshaw nodded approvingly. Given the circumstances and her complete cooperation, I believe the magistrate will view her case with appropriate consideration. It was then that Poirot made his final, most significant discovery. Among the papers scattered on Sir Montague's writing desk, he located a half-finished letter that would transform the family's understanding of their patriarch's final intentions. Inspector, there is one detail that may prove crucial to this family's future, Poirot announced, holding up the document. Sir Montague had been corresponding with collectors in London, not about selling the manuscript outright, but about establishing a charitable trust that would preserve it for future generations while providing income to support the family. Lady Vivian gasped, examining the letter with trembling hands. He never mentioned this possibility. I thought the sale was inevitable. Your husband, Madame, was seeking solutions that would honor both financial necessity and family heritage. Had he lived to complete these arrangements, the crisis that led to his murder might have been resolved without sacrifice of principle or life. The irony was profound and heartbreaking. Dr. Marsh had committed murder to prevent exposure of fraud motivated by financial desperation, while Sir Montague had been quietly working toward solutions that would have preserved everyone's dignity and security. As the official business concluded and Dr. Marsh was led away in custody, the morning sun climbed higher over the Yorkshire moors, burning away the last traces of fog that had concealed the night's deadly deceptions. Poirot stood once more before the tall windows, now clear and revealing the winter landscape in all its austere beauty. The fog, mes amis, he observed with quiet satisfaction, is often merely a metaphor for the obfuscation created by human passions and desperate choices. But even the thickest mist must eventually lift, revealing the truth beneath. Tonight we have witnessed how noble intentions, when misdirected, can create consequences as tragic as malicious ones. Lady Vivian approached him with something of her former dignity restored. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. Without your intervention, the truth might never have emerged from this terrible fog of deception. Truth, Madame, has a persistence that rivals the morning sun itself. It may be obscured temporarily, but it cannot be destroyed. He adjusted his waistcoat with characteristic precision. The whisper in the winter fog has been silenced forever, not by supernatural forces, but by the methodical application of logic and the inexorable pursuit of justice. As we prepared to depart Blackmore Hall, the ancient walls seemed to settle into peaceful repose, their secrets finally exposed to the cleansing light of day. The manuscript would remain with the family, preserved through Sir Montague's wise planning, while justice had been served for his murder. The fog had lifted completely now, revealing a world transformed by truth and the promise of redemption for those who survived to see another dawn. The whisper in the winter fog had claimed its victim, but Hercule Poirot had ensured that its voice would never again disturb the peace of Blackmore Hall. The sound of the police motor faded into the morning air as Dr. Marsh was taken away, her dignified bearing finally broken by the weight of her confession. The drawing-room of Blackmore Hall settled into a profound quiet, broken only by the soft hiss of the dying fire and the gentle whisper of retreating fog against the tall windows. The assembled company sat in stunned silence, each grappling with the terrible revelations that had transformed their understanding of the night's events. Lady Vivian clutched Sir Montague's half-finished letter about the charitable trust, tears streaming down her face as she comprehended the true nature of her husband's final plans. "He was trying to save everything," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The manuscript, the family honor, even our financial security, and I never understood the burden he carried." Poirot moved to the window where the first rays of morning sun were beginning to penetrate the thinning mist. Sir Montague was indeed a man of honor, madame. His final act was one of profound foresight, creating a legacy that would preserve both family heritage and financial stability for generations to come. Roderick, who had remained silent throughout Dr. Marsh's arrest, finally found his voice. The letter she burned, Father's instructions about my debts. I realize now he wasn't threatening me. He was trying to save me from myself. Precisely, mon ami, Poirot confirmed gently. Your father understood that true responsibility cannot be built upon foundations of deception. He sought to guide you toward redemption, not destruction. Miss Ashford, her remarkable composure finally restored, stepped forward with quiet dignity. Lady Vivian, I offer my resignation, of course. My actions, however well-intentioned, contributed to the very crisis I sought to prevent. Lady Vivian looked up through her tears, then shook her head firmly. No, Cordelia, your loyalty to this family has never been in question. What we need now is not recrimination, but reconstruction. Will you help us honor Montague's vision for the trust? The young woman's green eyes brightened with something approaching hope. It would be my privilege, my lady. Poirot adjusted his waistcoat with characteristic precision, the gesture signaling his satisfaction with the resolution. And so we see, mes amis, how even from the darkest fog of deception and tragedy, the light of truth can illuminate a path toward redemption. Dr. Marsh's crime sprang from desperation, but it need not define the legacy of this house. Inspector Bradshaw appeared in the doorway one final time. Monsieur Poirot, all the official business has been concluded. Dr. Marsh has signed her full confession and given Miss Ashford's cooperation and the family's wishes. I believe the magistrate will view her case with appropriate leniency. Justice tempered with mercy, Poirot observed with approval. The law recognizes that not all crimes spring from identical sources. As the inspector departed, Poirot gathered his coat and gloves, preparing for our own departure. The fog outside had lifted almost completely now, revealing the Yorkshire landscape in all its austere winter beauty. The whisper that had haunted Blackmore Hall throughout the night had been silenced forever, not by supernatural forces, but by the methodical application of logic and the inexorable pursuit of truth. "Come, Hastings," Poirot said, moving toward the door with his characteristic gliding step. "Our work here is complete. The little grey cells have arranged the facts in their proper order, and justice has been served." As we prepared to leave, Lady Vivian approached Poirot with restored dignity. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. Without your intervention, the truth might have remained buried beneath layers of deception and supernatural nonsense." Poirot's grey eyes gleamed with quiet satisfaction. "Truth, madame, possesses a persistence that rivals the morning sun itself. It may be obscured temporarily by the fog of human passion and desperate choices, but it cannot be destroyed." We stepped outside into the crisp morning air, where the last wisps of mist were surrendering to the advancing daylight. The ancient stones of Blackmore Hall seemed to settle into peaceful repose, their secrets finally exposed to the cleansing light of dawn. "The whisper in the winter fog has been silenced forever, mon ami," Poirot observed as our motor wound down the long drive. "But its lesson endures, that even the thickest mist of deception must eventually yield to the patient application of reason and the unwavering pursuit of justice." Behind us, Blackmore Hall stood revealed in the morning sunlight, no longer shrouded in mystery, but restored to its rightful dignity. The fog had lifted completely now, and with it, the shadows that had concealed murder had been banished forever by the clear light of truth.